Hi, NASCAR fans. Welcome to this edition of Dan Beaver's NASCAR Fantasy Pit Stop. I'm Charlie Turner. I'm joined by, of course, NASCAR Fantasy Racing Guru Dan Beaver. Hey, Dan, how are you?
I'm doing great.
All right, so we're going into one of the few weeks during the season when we don't have a Sprint Cup race upcoming. We're going to take a week off before they go to the Brickyard for the I don't know what they're calling it this year. Is it the Allstate 400 at the Brickyard or?
Yeah, I think so. Same thing as last year.
Yeah. So we'll talk more in depth about Indianapolis next week when we come in and do our show next prior to that race. But we're going to kind of do a recap of the season so far in NASCAR fantasy racing, and specifically focus on drivers that have some momentum going into this break. I think is the way we're going to go. Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can tell people what they should be watching for at this point in the season.
Well, the first thing, we're week 19? We've got 17 weeks remaining. This is our last off week of the year. That really needs to be planned out a little bit better, I think. Sure would be nice if we could get an off week between the end of the regular season and the beginning of the chase to reset. I've asked the question a time or two, and the answer I always get is NASCAR doesn't want to lose the momentum that they carry going into the playoffs by having that off week. But I think if you give the reporters a chance to write, you give everybody a chance to reset, you get a little more interest in that final 10-race segment.
I'm a little bit surprised that they haven't done that, because that's what the NFL does before Super Bowl. There's that week, that Super Bowl week where they have the big media frenzy down wherever they're having it at that particular year, and they get, I think, at least the NFL gets a lot of additional publicity and a lot of buzz about that, and I think NASCAR could probably do that with the chase. I don't know if it would be better the week before the chase starts, or if it would be better the week before championship weekend. Probably the chase, because there would be more drivers to actually talk about. But
and hype the hell out of it like the NFL does. Right now, Chicagoland just seems like another race, the same way Richmond's just another race. So they want to make it special. I think they ought to insert a little off week in there. But as it is, we now hit that grueling part of the schedule where there is no break until the checkered flag waves over Homestead. So it's a good chance to take a moment, reflect. This is the time of year when teams either get their second wind or they stumble during this part of what they tried to call the race to the chase for the championship. Kind of hard to say. We're a couple of weeks into that. We got 7 weeks to go. I think one thing that we noticed at New Hampshire is that the intensity is ratcheting up for drivers with nothing to lose, and it's getting a little more gut-wrenching for those drivers with something to lose. Tony Stewart, at this point, pretty much has to win a race to get in. He's far enough down in the standings that he's going to have a hard time if he doesn't win a race. But Jeff Gordon is high enough in the points that he would not have tried that fuel mileage gamble. He knew he was going to run out of gas, almost certainly, and that's not something he would have done in the past, even with a good points lead. So the new rules are changing the game for people who play fantasy racing. You not only have to start thinking about how a driver performs at this given track or track type, but where he is in the standings and exactly what it is that he has to lose. Jimmy Johnson's blown tire last week. That was his fourth tire problem of the year. His second accident in back-to-back weeks. Can't fault him for anything that goes on at Daytona, but the tire, they've got to be doing something, experimenting, and you can't say that it's not working for them. They've got 3 victories. Certainly have been the class of the field on a number of occasions. So that experimentation is working for the team. But it's certainly making the job difficult for fantasy players to figure out exactly where someone's going to run well. And we've said this in the past. We've gotten to the point where you've got drivers with something to lose and drivers without that don't have anything to lose as we get to this part of the schedule. But now it's really different because points mean absolutely nothing so long as you have multiple victories. And so long as you're not in Kurt Busch's shoes where you're at least mathematically in jeopardy of dropping out of the top 30. I guess most drivers are mathematically capable of dropping out of the top 30, except for Keselowski and Earnhardt. Everybody else, but you'd have to have an extremely bad luck if you're a Matt Kenseth, and everybody else have extremely good luck in order to get you knocked all that way down. So the game's different this year, and I think this off week might be a good time to reflect on how the game has changed for each individual player, and start thinking in terms of what are the next 7 weeks hold. Once we get to the chase, I think it's going to reset again. At that point, things are going to change so quickly in those 3-week periods that you're not going to see a driver adopt a strategy of, let's just go for broke. We have nothing to lose except the race, and or at least not all of them will do it. But when Denny Hamlin, Kevin Harvick, and Jeff Gordon all run out of gas in the final lap at New Hampshire, or in the final laps at New Hampshire, Hamlin was the only one astute enough to pit, or willing to pit, because he needs to regain some momentum on short flat tracks, perhaps. It really kind of slapped me in the face, and I think other fantasy players in the face, that there's a totally different set of scenario going on here than we've ever been accustomed to.
Yeah, I would think it would make it extremely difficult to advise people how to predict things, because it does. This absolutely changes. There becomes very much an all or nothing aspect to some of these drivers, like you say, the 3 you mentioned that ran out of fuel at New Hampshire.
Well, and then toss Jimmy Johnson in there too with the tire gambles. So you had 4 marquee drivers that you've got to question whether or not you should write them off for the next 7 weeks, and you can't do that because each of them are going to score top 5s in that 7-week period. But it makes these races a lot like Daytona, where it's the luck of the draw, or if the crew chiefs would tell us whether or not this was the week they were going to be risking, that would be something helpful. But I don't think they know until they climb on top of that pit box. I don't think anybody could have told you how the New Hampshire race was going to play out before it started for those 4 guys.
Well, and then you throw in the weather too. I mean, Daytona was ended in a weird way. Of course, Daytona is perhaps a bad example of talking about this, but the unpredictable weather did certainly affect the finish there in that race. Could happen in any of these races as well.
Well, yeah, Daytona.
When you look at a long-term weather forecast, I mean, do you look at the weather forecast when you're 3 days from the race weekend? Do you look and see whether, hey, this could be a rain-shortened weekend? Does that factor into any of your predictions?
Nah, because it can't. You just don't know who's going to be running where.
Yeah.
It's Joey Logano winning the rain-shortened race at Loudon for his first win. He had no way to know that he was going to be close enough to the front, and that 5 or 6 or 7, however many it was, people in front of him pitted. He had no idea that they would do that. I would have thought more people would have stayed out that day. Where Daytona's concerned, it just stopped the music a little bit earlier. It's still a game of musical chairs, and someone's going to get that first seat regardless of when the music stops. So it didn't affect Daytona, but it could very well have affected this race. It could have very well affected some other race, but you just don't know what that's going to be. So when you get into those situations, you've got to make your best picks, and just realize that strategy is going to play havoc. And I would say the same thing about a fuel mileage strategy a lot of times, because they're unpredictable. You don't know who's going to be off sequence to the point that they can make that final pit stop right on the bubble, and who's going to gamble. But since it happened to so many people, it's indicative of something more than just a wild card strategy by 1 or 2 teams. I think it points to a different way of looking at races now that was predicted but not seen up until this stage of the season. The only thing that matters is winning to certain drivers, and that either means they're going to win. If the race had gone green, I don't know if Gordon had enough gas to make it to the end, or if it was the getting down on the flat and such that helped him run out. If the race had gone green, he might have finished second. Made him a great fantasy play. As it is, finished 26th, and made him a horrible fantasy play. And so David Reagan is who got into Justin Allgaier there at the end. You know, who knew that with 2 laps to go, 2 drivers who were racing at the back of the lead lap would completely alter the way the finishing order was. But then it elevated some people who needed good runs. Ryan Newman, Tony Stewart, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Denny Hamlin, because he changed his strategy quickly. All of those were drivers that needed good runs and that we're not necessarily accustomed to seeing in the top 10. That brought them up. And so you try to see if there is a trend that's going to get them close enough to the top 10 that this kind of strategy will benefit them. If Ryan Newman was running 12th, it doesn't matter if it was Harvick, Gordon, and Hamlin that ran out of gas. Next week it could be Keselowski, Logano, and someone else, Dale Earnhardt Jr., that runs out of gas on the last lap. But if Newman is playing a somewhat conservative game, and he needs to because he has to be both concerned with his point standing and his and wins, so he's got to play a balanced game. He becomes a more interesting fantasy pick, a more predictable fantasy pick. Clint Bowyer the same way. I think he's 10th in the standings, but enough drivers have won races behind him that he's ranked 14th if the chase started tomorrow. He can't afford to gamble. He can't afford to do that. He's got to try to get a top 10 finish, and that makes him a more interesting, more fantasy relevant than even a Jeff Gordon, who could win. Certainly has been running stronger than Bowyer all year long up until now. But Bowyer could be a better fantasy pick going forward than Gordon is.
What about what about momentum? Does anybody have any momentum carrying over and going to Indy at this point?
Well, I think Daytona was a big momentum killer, and it's going to take a while to see who can regain it. The only drivers that have scored back-to-back top 10s are Clint Bowyer and Denny Hamlin, 2 drivers that really needed it. And in Bowyer's case, you take Kentucky out, he's got back-to-back top 10s at Michigan and Sonoma. So I think he's got some momentum, but it's top 10 momentum and not necessarily top 5 or winning momentum. Then you look at Brad Keselowski, who has finished 2nd or 3rd on every unrestricted oval dating back to Dover. He certainly has momentum. He stumbled at Sonoma, he stumbled at Daytona, but other than that, he's been almost perfect here recently. Dale Earnhardt Jr. Drew 14th in the Talladega Lottery, but that's his only sub-10th place finish dating back to Dover. Finished 19th at Charlotte the week before that. So Earnhardt has momentum. Even so, he was disappointed with the 10th place finish last week. Thought he should have finished in the top 5. Thought he should challenge for the win, and he probably should have. It was my pick to win, based on how he'd been performing on short flat tracks. So, but still, the fact that he was disappointed with the top 10 finish, the 10th place finish, I think is encouraging because it means that he recognizes the level that this team can achieve and should achieve, and he's going to keep trying to get there. And
oh, I lost you. Let me re-invite Dan back in here a minute. We lost him for oh, there he is. I don't know what happened there.
I'm not sure exactly where we lost me, but I was rambling on about Earnhardt for a little while there. So
yeah, you're right about there. Just all of a sudden you went away. I thought, wait a minute. I'm not sitting here and doing this myself. People don't want to listen to me.
And I was saying good things about Dale Earnhardt. If I was saying bad things, you figure someone...
Somebody cut you off? Yeah. NASCAR cut you off.
But that was kind of the end of the thoughts on momentum. Otherwise, Kyle Busch with 2nd place finishes in 2 of the last 3 races, the 2 unrestricted races, probably has some momentum. Ryan Newman now is back-to-back top 5s. If you take Daytona out of the equation, and he's finishing better now than he was at the beginning of the season. So those are drivers that I think you're going to want to look at. Pocono, Indianapolis, Watkins Glen, they could carry that forward. Watkins Glen, you might pull that out of there because it's a road course, but if you don't pick Ambrose and Tony Stewart, Jeff Gordon, you got to be looking for some of these drivers that you don't normally think of on road courses. Yeah. And anybody can get up in the top 10 on any given Sunday, even on a road course.
Well, before we wind this edition of Dan Beaver's Fantasy Pit Stop up this week, we'll be coming back to talk again next week about more in depth about the Brickyard 400. But anything that fans could watch for this weekend? I know some of the drivers will be running in the nationwide race in Chicago this weekend. And I don't know if there's a Camping World Truck race this week or not. Anything that anybody can watch for that would help them maybe get a little bit of an edge, possibly in next week's picks or the picks coming up?
Oh, probably not. Whoever runs well at Chicagoland this week might be someone to keep an eye on next time they come to Chicagoland. So you do, but the track will have changed. Don't know what kind of tires they'll have in each instance. So no, except for maybe a driver like Kyle Larson, who's still trying to get seat time, still trying to get even more comfortable in these heavy stock cars compared to what he ran in the past. Although he certainly seems comfortable enough as it is. Finished third last week at Charlotte. I think it was his fourth top 5 of the year.
Yeah, and he kind of put a stop on a little bit of a mini skid too there. Thought that was pretty significant myself.
And yeah, that was important because he could have panicked.
Right.
Could have panicked. The team could have panicked. They didn't. They knew that there was a reason for each one of their bad finishes, and they just put it behind them. That's odd for a rookie. You don't usually see that kind of poise in a rookie. It also
he's not a normal rookie.
It also kind of put an end to the speculation that Austin Dillon could start to catch back up to him. So long as Larson's scoring top 10 finishes, Dillon's not going to catch him in the rookie standings.
No, we'll keep watching that, but it looks to me like Kyle Larson will be the rookie of the year this year. But they both had good seasons. So, okay.
We did see something else earlier today. It's way down the road, but Ty Dillon's going to make his NASCAR Cup debut at Atlanta. So you've got another, in something like the Yahoo game, you've got one more opportunity to get a driver in a good car. It'll be in the number 33. That's actually a Richard Childress car instead of a Joe Falk car that weekend. And so he could be one of those differentiators when we get to Atlanta in several weeks.
Yeah, an alternate pick to Austin Dillon and Kyle Larson that week if you're running out of those allocations. That's good stuff. Okay, he is Dan Beaver. Of course, you can follow him on Twitter at Fantasy Race. Watch his Dan Beaver's Fantasy Racing Pit Stop here every week on Pit Row and on our YouTube page, and watch replays of that. I'm Charlie Turner. Follow me on Twitter at On Pit Row. Dan, thanks for all you did this week, and we'll talk soon.
I'll be here.
All right.